What's up, everybody? I hope everybody's doing well today. I am your man, Jordin. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted Black Thoughts, a podcast dedicated to Black men. Hope everybody's having a great day so far. For today's topic, I was having a couple of conversations with some of my friends and peers about mental health. Since May is Mental Health Awareness Month, we kind of got into some deep conversations about mental health and just a couple of, just little things that we were talking about, like what do we do to like watch our mental health and, anything that we have going on in our lives personally that might affect our mental health. And over the course of the conversation, one of my friends, actually a couple of my friends actually got into this conversation that, or had the viewpoint that, they don't really believe in mental health. Like their whole thing is they don't really believe in it, or they don't really understand it very well. Not so much they don't believe it, but they don't really understand it very well. And it kind of got into this conversation about breaking down what mental health is and, what are some signs that it looks like. What does mental health look like, especially during this month, where, it's kind of on the forefront. It's something that everybody is kind of thinking about and trying to, become more proactive in dealing with and more proactive in coming out and speaking out against. Not really against, but speaking out in reference to. And so that leads into today's episode where I wanted to break down what mental health was. And this, as a matter of fact, this episode is actually going to be a two-parter. When I was thinking about it, I decided that this episode was going to be a two-parter where today's episode would be just going over what mental health is, how does it really affect Black men, and, some hidden triggers and get into that. And then, the next episode kind of talking about, different ways to combat mental health or different ways to kind of deal with that, to help fix mental health. By the way, excuse me if you hear some sniffling. I just had a little bit of a sinus infection trying to get over that. I've already turned the curtain in the corner, so I'm doing good on it. Just last second sniffles. But without further ado, let's get into it. For mental health, I feel like, especially in the Black community and with Black men, this is something that we have struggled with immensely. It's something that a lot of Black men don't really know how to deal with and cope with. It's something that really we just started learning as a society how to really speak out and become more proactive in it. And even now, it's still something that is largely frowned upon, or something that is largely unpracticed in the Black community, specifically with Black men. As Black men, we haven't really learned. We've just started to learn about mental health and really about what goes into it, and ways to deal with it. It's not something that we're familiar with. And so for us, that I think we've struggled with it the most because of that, because, we're just learning about it. We're just learning what it looks like, what it sounds like. And we're just learning that a lot of us are struggling with it. But for example, I think we can't really get into how we're struggling with it or those things without really defining what mental health is. And based off of the Oxford definition for mental health is a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being. And that pretty much just goes into how a person's feeling, how a person's doing from the day to day, and their mood. When specifically with Black men and in general, I feel like a lot of us, when we hear mental health and we hear of mental health awareness, a lot of us, the first thing that we think about is like a mental health disease. like schizophrenia, a personality disorder, Down syndrome, like those kind of things. We think of, psychological disorders or mental disorders that of those nature. When in reality, mental health awareness also encompasses depression, anxiety, rage, severe temper. Mental health encompasses all of those things. It doesn't just encompass mental health diseases like schizophrenia or personality disorder or dissociative disorder. It encompasses depression. It encompasses anxiety. It encompasses rage. It encompasses all emotions in general. And I feel like as a demographic, we often misconstrue what mental health is, and we often at times feel like that's not something that we connect to, or that's not something that we have to worry about because we don't have these things. When in reality, a lot of us battle with these things on the day-to-day basis. Depression, anxiety, temper. Part of the reason why, we've never really connected with it, or, we kind of disassociate with it, is because we've never really had anybody to really kind of walk us through what it looks like, or really show that they really care about it. I can honestly say, growing up, I did not have many people that really paid attention to my mental health, my mental well-being. I didn't have many people that really cared about how I felt. I didn't have people to really look at it, to really ask me, how are you doing? Or really try to get to know, what's going on in my day to day if I was down for a certain amount of days, and I think all, or just about many, large majority of Black men can agree with this, or can, relate to this. A lot of times, especially in our house, specifically in our households and our families, our family members really never put much emphasis on mental health. If we were going through issues or going through problems, a large majority of our parents would just be like, what's wrong with you? Better fix yourself before I fix you. A lot of, our parents or brothers or sisters, they didn't really, ask us, how are you feeling? Or are you doing okay now? Or really, they didn't really do that. And if your parents did do that, then, you were blessed to have that. If you have family that did emphasize mental well-being, and did emphasize, or show that, show some care in that regard, then that's great. But for the vast majority of Black men, we never had that before, and a lot of times we didn't have that until maybe we were playing football and a coach might have been that, but we misconstrued that for something else. Or if a friend would do that, but we misconstrued that for being soft. And matter of fact, a lot of times when we grew up, when people asked us those kind of questions, like, are we okay? How are we feeling? We equated to being soft. We never really had that emotional outlet growing up. We never really had anybody that we could sit down and just kind of talk about our emotions with, And if we did, it's very rare for us to have that. So for us Black men, that plays a large role into why there's such a disconnect with us and our mental well-being. Why we still don't understand a lot of things about mental well-being. Why we don't know that we have something that we might be battling with depression, or we might be battling with rage or anxiety. There's so many things that we've never really understood or had the chance to understand, because we've never really been preached it, or we've never really we never experienced it before. We've never really been exposed to mental health well-being and taking care of your mental well-being, learning about processing trauma and unpacking trauma, just processing depression and disappointment and those moods. We never really had anybody that we never really faced that. We never really been exposed with knowledge on mental well-being. And if we have, it's not, again, it's few in between. It's not the vast majority. And so I think for us as Black men, it's so imperative for us to take care of our mental well-being, and to first understand, mental health, and then also being able to figure out, what we're struggling with, what we're battling with. Because I can tell you right now, every person is dealing with something. Every person is dealing with something. And I feel like as Black men, we are so quick to kind of push it away and kind of write it off as something else, or find other coping mechanisms for it, instead of dealing with it in a healthy manner. But I think it all starts with just learning about mental health and understanding what mental health looks like, and just understanding, what the things that we go through on the daily basis affect us. And it's okay for us to be affected by these things. It's okay for us to feel some sort of way. It's okay for us to ultimately to be able to talk about those things. And I think it's so important for us to have a space that we can talk about our emotions, or about what's going on in our lives. Because there are so many things that as Black men we go through that we internalize, because we don't feel like we're being heard or we're being understood. And I think that's another problem with mental health in Black men in the Black community, is a lot of times we would want that. We want that space to be able to talk about our feelings. We want that opportunity to be able to share, what's going on in our lives. But we feel like nobody really cares. We don't really get the platform or space to talk about those things. And so I think it's so key and it's so crucial for us to have that platform, to have that space for us to be able to talk about what's going on in our lives. Because as Black men, we go through so much. We go through so much in society, how society labels us, what society wants us to do, with society's image for us, our families, us being providers as men, providing for our families, being good spouses and being good mates for our significant others. There's so much that goes into it. And then also finding our identity, finding us, who we are. There's so much pressure on the Black man specifically that I feel doesn't really get talked about enough. And we don't have enough platforms for enough to talk about it. And a lot of times it's because we're not comfortable opening up. And so I think it's so important for us to open up as men about our problems and finding those places where we feel comfortable, and not going to coping mechanisms like drugs, like alcohol, like pornography. It is so crucial for us to find positive outlets rather than negative outlets, whether it's being able to call somebody up during the day and just talk to them, or being able to go to therapy. But we're going to save that stuff. We're going to save, the coping mechanisms and stuff for the next step, for part 2. Part 1, I wanted to hone in on just what mental health looks like for a Black man. And in reality, mental health has so many different looks. There's no set look, or there's no set, description for mental health. Depression doesn't just come in mopiness and, down emotions. Depression is not eating. Depression comes in, not doing the usual things that you would usually do. throughout your day to day. Depression is not being not being hygienic, not really not really taking pride in hygiene. Depression comes in so many different looks and so many different faces. And it's important for us as black men to identify when we're and recognize when we're depressed, when we're not feeling up 100% strong. The same thing can go with anxiety. Anxiety is not just bouncing off the walls. Anxiety is, not being able to think straight. Anxiety is maybe having motor mouth. Anxiety might come in fidgeting. There are so many different looks to anxiety and depression that people I honestly think get mixed up. And it's important for us to recognize those signs. And whenever we're going through those things, to identify and to, most importantly, come out and be open with it. We can't bottle it in. And it's so tough to say that. It's so tough to say that because I even have that struggle bottling in my emotions and not really telling people about what's going on, like my internal battles. But I think it's so important for us to be able to come out and be vocal about it. And I know it's very hard because we feel like we don't have anybody to listen to, or people shut us down. But I feel like we have to be more vocal about it. And it's okay. It's not weak. It's not being weak in saying that, you're dealing with depression, or saying, I might be dealing with depression. I might be dealing with anxiety or panic attacks, or etc. It's not being weak. And we have to, as a society, especially black men, we got to get out of this notion that it's a sign of weakness if you have these things and you coming forth with these things. We got to get out of that. It's not being weak. I would honestly, in my opinion, you're viewed as weak if you don't come out and you have these things. You choose to bottle it up or cope with different things. I don't think of you as being weak if you're coming out and coming forth and saying, you know what, I got depression. I've been battling with depression for X, Y, and Z, or I've been battling with anxiety for this much, or I've been suicidal for this long. I think that there's a degree of strength that I think somebody has to have to be able to come forth and come out and acknowledge that they have a flaw and be willing to come out and work on that flaw. I think that it's so it speaks so much to someone's internal strength to be able to come out and say, I have depression, or I have this kind of flaw. And I feel like we have to do that more as black men. I understand it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. This is not something that's going to be an easy discussion, or it's not going to be something that is going to, just everybody's going to start doing right off the bat. If that's the case, more people would be doing it. But I think for right now, it's so important just to highlight that it's so important to focus on it. But more importantly, it's so important to have these outlets. It's so important to have the outlets so that you can feel safe to come out and say, I've been dealing with this, or I haven't been right over the last couple of weeks or last couple of months. It's okay. And if you've been told that you're weak dealing with it, if you've been told that you're not strong because you have these thoughts, if you've ever felt like you couldn't talk to anybody or that no one could understand you, allow me to be the first person to tell you that it's okay. And if you ever need a space, I would hope that this message would be that opening so that you can come out and feel comfortable talking, or that you do think about, coming out and coming forth. Because it's so, as black men, we have to put an emphasis on mental health, because without mental health, there is no us. We are needed in this society. Our families need us. Our spouses need us. Our children need us. Our future need us. There are so many things as black men that we bring to the table that this world needs, and we won't be able to give that, like, provide what our resources to the world, our gifts to the world, if we can't work on mental health and our mental well-being. We have to put an emphasis on mental health and taking care of ourselves. And it's so tough to do that because you don't even know the triggers. You probably don't even know your triggers, or probably don't even know what you have. Honestly, there's as black men, there's so many hidden trauma that we have yet to unlock that we probably wouldn't be able to even figure out, even if we just came out and said that we have depression. There's probably so many layers to it that we probably haven't unlocked yet. So many hidden triggers. Hell, I'm still figuring out a lot of my hidden triggers. There's so much that I've been going through, and I'm kind of glad that I'm having this discussion now. I can tell you a little bit about my story and just kind of put you in my world for just a moment. I never thought, growing up, I never really thought that I was battling with mental health, and it's kind of crazy because you would think that some of the stuff that I went through, you'd be like, Jordin, these are clear, obvious signs. I had a little bit of a temper growing up as a kid. I was bullied as a kid, going up all the way up until I was in late middle school, high school. I was bullied. A little bit of neglect, not in my front with my parents, but. And I will say a lot of it was just, some denial on my part too. But there were some hidden things some hidden trauma that I was dealing with that I had in my brain that I just recently started to unlock. There were some things that came to the forefront over a multitude of conversations with multiple people. Most of those conversations with my girlfriend, just having a lot of conversations about mental health and mental well-being and, just past trauma and stuff like that helped unlock a lot of the trauma that I had. Or at least it helped unlock some of the things or some of the unchecked emotions that I had that I never really processed properly. A lot of things that I kind of just chucked up to life and chucked up to, well, it is what it is, without properly processing it. Years of bullying that I never really processed. Years of temper that I never really checked on. I never really checked on or really tried to figure out what's the root of it. Past interactions with certain people, whether it's family or friends or teachers or colleagues or whoever, that went unchecked. And it wasn't until I would say maybe about a year ago that I really started to think heavily about my mental well-being and start thinking about just where I was in my mind, like psychologically. The fact that I was not really fine. The fact that for years I would tell myself I'm fine, or I would deal with stuff and just think that, it was just a phase. When in reality, it was actually a lot of unchecked emotions, a lot of unchecked trauma, unlocked and unprocessed trauma that I was dealing with that I never really dealt with. That in the moment, I would just deal with those emotions, but I would never really properly process and just completely work through them. Like the moment they came and went, but I always pushed them to the side. They never really went anywhere. I just shoved them away and put them in a different compartment of my brain until something similar happened and I would feel these emotions. Or when things are going fine, suddenly I feel this feeling of just dread or just mopiness or depression or crying or whatever, anxiety. And all of that was because of the fact that I had so many things that I just never processed, so many emotions and past memories and trauma that I never properly processed. And it took so long. It took me years from the time I was like 3 to all the way till now, to a year ago, that I finally realized these things were actually issues that I was dealing with. These were actual problems that I had to work through and I had to process, and I never did. I never properly processed my emotions. I never properly, compartmentalized a lot of these things. And so they were just building up and building up and building up. And I was always wondering, when I erupted, why was I always erupting? Why was there an eruption? And it's because there was so much stuff underneath the surface that was just bottling up and was just fizzing up, that at some point in time it was going to erupt. And that's when I realized, about a year ago, that I can't just continue to let this stuff just continue to bottle up. I can't continue to just live my life like this. And in hindsight, it stopped me from being a better person. It reached a point where it actually capped me off from being a better person, from being a better significant other, being a better friend, because I was dealing with issues that I never properly dealt with. I never properly processed these things. So there were so many emotions that were bleeding into my life, into the life that I was living. Even if I was living a decent life, there were moments where something small would happen and I would react so just completely off the charts. And I'm not even saying off the chart as in anger or whatever, but just emotions. If something small would happen and suddenly I'm bursting in a full-blown just tears, or I'm just full-blown panic. And so that at one point, I realized that I have problems. I have some unchecked emotions, some unchecked trauma that I need to process through and I need to reach out on. Because that was just the very beginning. It could have possibly escalated. I'm blessed that it did not escalate past those instances. I'm glad I was able to read the signs at that point. But there were so many moments where I didn't read the signs. And in those moments, I just chalked it up to, oh, well, it was just a lot at the moment. Yeah, it might have been a lot at the moment, but it was a lot before then that I never really got to the conclusion of. I never properly closed on some of these emotions and feelings. And it started putting me in a very bad place. There were moods and there were habits that I would have that I could never shake. And I never knew what it was until I started reaching out, going to therapy and just reaching out about it, talking to people, and finally identifying this was this. For example, when I'm nervous, or when I'm in deep thought or a contentious moment, I shake my leg. Like, I would move my leg and shake my leg. When I'm either in deep thought and processing something, or when there's like an anxious moment, I would start to just wiggle my leg. And crazy enough, my girlfriend actually was the one that spotted it out to me when we were having a conversation. She's the one that spotted it out and was just like, "You always do this," and I never really thought about it. I never really equated it to my anxiety. But that was something that I realized at that moment. A little little habit I had. Always wanting to appease and always being afraid of confrontation was something that is huge. That goes into my anxiety and a bit of my depression. Being told that I was wrong or that my opinion never mattered. It put me in a place where I didn't want to be. I felt like if I was disagreeing with the other person, or if I was in disagreement, or it was a confrontation, it gave me anxiety. I shut down. I would go quiet, or I would just tell the other person, even if something was bothering me, eating me alive, I would just tell them I'm fine. And a lot of that came from being anxious and just wanting to avoid fear of confrontation, because I felt like if there was a confrontation, then my whatever I was saying was going to be shut down, or my opinion would never be valid. Those are just a handful of things. I can go on about some of the stuff that's wrong, but those are just some things that in the beginning, early in life, like I'm talking like maybe 5-6 years ago, I never really thought much of it. I never really thought much of those things. I always thought that they were just little habits I had, but I never really thought that, fear of confrontation was actually my depression, was actually my depression speaking out in that form. And that's not the only way that my depression comes out. But I never really put two and two together. And part of that is because growing up, I didn't have as much of the outlet. It wasn't really emphasized as much. Even when someone asked me, "Are you okay?" I never really thought to tell them how I really felt, because for majority of the time, I always felt like people were just asking me, but they didn't really care. I never really felt like anybody really cared. Even if somebody really did. When you're constantly beat down, when you're so used to being beat down or told nobody and even shown that nobody cares, eventually when somebody does care, you're going to be so used to not opening up. You're going to get so used to closing yourself off that when somebody actually does care, it's going to be hard. And as black men, I think we've reached that point. And I completely understand it, because I've been there before. I'm still there now. I still have problems opening up about simple stuff, even little simple stuff. It could be something as simple as I got a bad cough I don't like to open up about, or I'm just having a bad day I don't like to open up about. There are certain things that I just don't like to open up about and don't like to really tell anybody. You'd have to beat it out of me just for me to admit it or say it. Or I would tell you one thing, in reality the exact opposite's going on. It comes from a lack of trust, but it comes from a place where, as a black man, I've been told so many times and shown so many times that nobody really cares, or I have to operate at a different capacity, at a different level, or I'm weak, or I'm not successful. That anything outside of those things, any traits that did not fit those traits, I never associated with. And it's that's so dangerous. It's dangerous to not be able to associate with something, to associate with a certain trait because of what somebody else feels about it. That is such dangerous thinking. It's something that I, as a black man, have struggled with. And I know that if I'm struggling with it, there are many others out there that are probably struggling with the exact same thing. And if it's not the exact same thing, a little bit different, but having the same problem that I'm having. And it's scary because, again, we want a safe space. Sometimes we want somebody to just hug us and tell us it's okay. Sometimes we just need that shoulder to cry on. But society has broken us down to the point where it almost feels like nobody really cares when we do try, or when we feel like we need to, when we feel like we want to. Society tells us in some way or another, no, you guys can't feel like that because that's weak. Mental health is not weak. It's not weak to acknowledge that you have a problem so that you can fix it or work towards fixing it. It's not weak to acknowledge that you might have that you don't might understand this emotion that you're feeling. That isn't weak. And as black men, we get beat down so much about other stuff that that's something that we don't want to feel like we're weak. We're classified as a million other things in this world. We don't want to be classified as weak. But yet, caring about mental health somehow has been labeled as being weak. And I'm here to say that it's not weak. We need people to talk to about our stuff, about these problems that we have. Even if it's just talking to somebody about our day, somebody that'll just listen to us. Even if it's something as simple as, man, my shoe got untied and I fell face first on the concrete. I was a little embarrassed. We need somebody to open up to. We want somebody to open up to and talk to. And sometimes just give us a hug and let us know it's okay. And it actually be okay. So many people want to tell us that it's okay and not mean it. I'm here to tell you that's a load of bullshit. Society has beat us down. We can't beat ourselves down. And we have to take care of our mental health. It's so crucial for us to do so. And it's so crucial for us to find ways and find positive outlets. Whether it's talking to somebody or just having a hobby, just something. But that'll come in the future. That'll come later. My story continues in mental health. You know, I pride myself in, not just, talking out about my own struggles, but I pride myself in researching about mental health and things that I could be doing better, or just some signs that I still might not have picked up on, that I might exude. Just ways to deal with them. I still, to this day, I'm still unlocking a lot of emotions and trauma. I've just begun the journey of, self-healing and trauma. I've just begun that journey. I still don't know and recognize a lot of the signs and indications. But I can tell you right now, personally, I feel 20 times better now than I ever did at a certain point in the past when I wasn't emphasizing mental health and when I didn't know any of this stuff. Because now I understand, okay, even if I don't understand this sign, I understand this emotion. I understand how I feel in these moments. And I can kind of decompress. I can begin to decompress and figure out, what triggered this moment and work my way there. It's a start. It might not be the finished product. And I know this is nowhere near where I want to be, maybe 10, 15 years down the road. But I can honestly say, as a start, I'm happy and I'm so proud of myself for starting. And I'm so thankful for, the people that showed me, and really kind of let me know that it was okay to feel this way, and it was okay to start to, decompress and, and work through some of these past trauma. There's a few people in particular that I want to thank so much for it. One of my friends, I would say all of our conversations would always lead back somehow into us dealing with our mental health and working these things through. And I thank God for our conversations, because whether he knew it or not, he was helping me see the signs then, or see the beginning signs of it then. I'm thankful to the stars and back for my girlfriend, because without her being able to, kind of challenge me in my mental health and pick up on a lot of these things and bring them to my forefront, I would have never even thought about working through these things and start taking these steps and actually taking it serious. I have to think there are a few more people I have to thank in my life. And I'm not going to go give them into specifics. They know who they are. That I thank them for being supportive and caring along the journey. And I feel like as Black men, we need people that are going to care, that are going to educate us on mental health and our well-being and how to deal with certain things, how to self-heal from past trauma and hurt. So many of us don't know how to heal from past trauma, like a parent leaving the household, or a spouse doing us wrong, or toxic friendships. We don't know how to deal with those things. We don't know how they're actually affecting our mental health, our mental well-being. And it's so important for us to figure out and to understand the signs, understand those things that can that can ultimately affect our mental well-being in a positive or negative light. Because those things, those past trauma events can affect them, can affect our mental being now. Even if they happened years ago. Like when you were a child, if you ever properly process them, you'll never know. You'll for one, you'll never know that you had the problem, but you never know how to deal with it. Those things can last years. And they can affect who we are now. Please, as black men, we must take care of our well-being. Mentally, specifically. Because if we take care of our mental well-being, everything else will follow. But it's so important for us to not be afraid to speak out and not be afraid to approach others if we have questions or concerns or we don't understand something. It's okay. It's okay to reach out. And I challenge my brothers out there. If you feel some sort of way, if you ever need anyone to talk to, ever need anyone to reach out to, don't be afraid to reach out. It's okay. And I hope this episode and this message reaches somebody's ears and they begin to, if they haven't, they begin to maybe look into trying to unlock some self-hurt or focus on their mental well-being. I hope that this message just reaches one person, that one person could reach others. But I know as black men, if we are talking about bettering ourselves and improving as black men and doing better, this is actually where it starts. It starts with us taking mental health serious. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of part 1. Part 2, we are going to get more in depth on just methods of self-healing, methods of dealing with mental health and things that we can do and things that we shouldn't do, because there are some negative coping mechanisms.